Hello, how are you today? It feels like summer out today where I am in upstate New York. We kind of miss spring, um, but I'll take it. So, anyway, I wanted to check in. Recently, I did a lesson with a rider at a farm where I often do clinics, and I sometimes go and do a few lessons. And something came up, and I'm going to get into this deeper, but about the idea of me saying you need to create your own story. And so I want to go into that a little more. And it was one of those times, and I'm sure you've been in lessons and had it happen when your instructor uses some new phrase or word and it's like it clicks. And for me, that'll happen, and it's like that really clicked, and it could click with others. So I really want to save that phrase that I came up with or whatever. And sometimes later someone will come back to me and you said this, and it's like, oh wow, that really had impact. So this happened in this lesson, and it's something I've been starting to use, and I wanted to talk to you guys about. So before I get deep into it, though, I wanted to talk about visualization. I talked about it in my last live, and just review it because this is around all that. The idea that when we visualize something, our brains, whether it be negative or positive, practices it. And I'm very simplifying this, but the research has shown that the brain actually practices it, and it enhances those areas. So if you visualize, a really positive ride, and actually all the details and the feel of it and all that, your brain will have actually felt like it's practiced it, and it'll be easier when you go to actually do the ride itself, whether it be in a lesson or at a horse show or whatever. But if you think about it, when you're always visualizing negative results, you're practicing that, right? When you're talking about the negative stories that we can spin in our heads, which I know I can do them. And it's, a little bit of human nature, part of how our brain works, because our brain gets caught up on the negative. It does that for protective reasons to keep us safe. And I've gone into that in detail before. But it does do that. It has a negative bias, but it can get spinning if we don't resolve whatever we're thinking about that's negative. So if we don't, come up with a solution around it or whatever, it just can get spinning in our heads, and we get these stories going. We're making up all the stories about, well, what if this happens, and what's going to go. I know I'm going to get this wrong distance, and every time I jump a jump, I get a bad distance, or I never can get my canter transition well, and all the stories. What if tomorrow when I ride, it's going to be a little windy, I see, and my horse is going to be spooky, so I'm scared because I may fall off, and all those what ifs. So you really start practicing that and get that tension in your body, and of course bring that to your horse when you ride it, and just creating these scenarios in your head of things not going well, and these stories in your head of things not going well, and then practicing it basically while you keep thinking about it and brewing on it and all that. And as well as the stories get spinning in our heads, and though we can't think about anything else and be focused on the positive or on the present and get things accomplished that we want to get done, because we're in our heads stuck in these stories, and we lose connection with our horses. Even when you're off the horse, you lose connection with whatever you're doing. So it becomes, like I'll say to riders, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You start worrying, using I'm not going to get a good distance. I always miss my distances when I canter up on a single oxer or something like that. That it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you're just saying, this is what's going to happen. And you keep practicing it in your head. So in a recent lesson I was teaching, like I mentioned earlier, it was a few weeks ago, but I haven't had a chance to get to this. I was working with a young rider, a teenager, 16 or so, and she's moved up to this lovely new horse, and it's a great horse, but it's a challenge for her because it's a very talented horse. It's a very athletic horse. It's not a horse that she can't ride, but it's that next step up, and it'll play sometimes after the jumps. Not mean. It's just big strided, big. If you chip and it lands and you pull a little bit on it, it'll just, have an opinion, but nothing nasty at all. Nothing that's not rideable either. But because she's, moving up to this horse and getting in her head all these stories like, well, I think I'm going to have a problem, because when she first started, she's come off. But again, nothing major, nothing mean, just that, like, I chipped, fell on the neck, the horse kind of, took a couple bigger canter strides and I fell off. So in her head, she's constantly thinking, I'm going to miss, I'm going to have a problem. I may fall off. If my horse gets this bad distance, this is what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So we had this discussion, and she had a really, really thoughtful discussion for, a 16-year-old, really knew about it. I asked her questions. We got digging in a little bit. And she said, this is the story that's going on in my head. So as we're going along, I just said, we talked about some technical things that she needed to work on, getting taller in her body. Because as you tell these stories, you can get into that fetal position and you collapse, and then you put yourself in a less secure position and all that. So I talked to her about, her position in that it's important, but to understand how it's important to be balanced, to feel that balance over the horse, longer leg, security, able to, communicate to her horse, getting her hand in front of her, riding her horse up to her hand. We talked about some of those things. And we've talked about them before when I've been there, but just reinforcing that. And the more she rides, the older she gets, the better she understands it. And she was getting that idea. And then I said, now I want you to go out and create the story you want. Create the story that you want to happen. Don't live in the story that you think is going to happen, but create the story that you want to happen. And all of a sudden, she's like, okay. And her body position got better. She got taller and stronger and more confident looking. She rode her track. She was looking for where she was going. She was thinking about, I'm going to canter a straight line, and I'm going to get to the other end of the ring, and I'm going to keep my horse balanced and straight, and the jumps will come up because I've got my horse balanced and straight. And they did come up. And then she, and I would even say to her, make sure after the jumps, you're still riding your horse. Even if you're circling and finishing, you're still riding your horse as if you're going to the next jump. You're still creating that story and still telling your horse, this is how we're going to be. And in her mind, this is how I ride. And I complete everything. And I don't just let it all fall apart. And she did that. And it kept building and building. And she got more and more positive jumps. And you could see her like, wow, this really works. So she just really started in her head creating this more positive stories. And even then when she had some mistakes, because we all have mistakes, she was able to work with them in a more positive mindset. And it was really interesting. And I just love it when like all of a sudden a little line will come up and I'm like, oh, this really works. This means maybe not for every rider, but it's something I can use. And riders will be like, oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. So it really creates a positive shift where you really, instead of getting cluttered in your head with all these stories that, you think are going to happen in a negative way, you just say, this is what I'm going to have happen. This is how I need to make it happen. And then you get to work. And like I said, she did that. And it was really, really, very interesting to watch. It was great to see it happen, to see her go, oh, this light bulb. And for this kind of idea of creating your own story, and I was certainly not the first person to come up with the idea of creating your own story, but just in that moment in your riding. And it was just really lovely to see. And I want you to think that you can create your own story, that, you can do that as well. What is the story you want? And it doesn't need to be, I'm going to ride at some high level. It could be, I'm not listening to everybody saying, I've got to go to this horse show, or I'm going to go to this horse show because that's what I think I should do. No, maybe my story is I want to stay home and really practice more so I feel really secure and build my skills and then go to the horse show. And it's okay to do that. That's my story. So if somebody says to you, well, why aren't you showing? Well, I'm working on improving my skills so that when I do go show, things go even better. Or if you hear from somebody, I had a client recently, you mentioned, and I've heard this before, where people be like, oh, you're riding, you're over 50, you're riding, is that safe? Particularly somebody who's maybe doesn't know a lot about horses, and they can put in your head, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, right? And it's like, that's their story. That's not your story. That's their story. Worrying about what, and it can be anything that somebody else says to you that isn't in line with what you want to do, but can start you thinking, oh, well, maybe they're right, or maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe this, or maybe that. So instead thinking, what is the story I want to create? And I'm not going to listen to the other stuff. Certainly I'm going to listen to my trainer and work on things and improve and listen to people who are going to support me. But even people who mean well will say things and it can kind of trigger something and get you going into that negative story. So what is the story you want? It could be, I just want to really improve my canter transitions. It doesn't need to be a huge story. What is the story you want, like right now for this week? For today when you go out to ride? And that can build into a bigger story. It doesn't need to be some huge thing that I want to go show, at jumping 3-foot level, or third level dressage, or Grand Prix someday, or whatever it may be. Maybe that is something you want to do, but it doesn't have to be that big. It has to be what's the story that's for you. And even if you want to do something bigger down the line, what's the story you want to create today to get there? And then tomorrow, and then the next day, and keep building on that. So again, think about that. So it's really your story. It's not what you hear from others, and it's not what you think you can't do. So, really, I'm seeing my mistake here, letting that go, my two capital letters. But maybe that works. Create the story you want. Just know that you can do this. And it doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be shame around, well, I'm not doing this the same way or as fast as my peers, or as soon as someone else, or in the same way, or jumping as high, or doing the same level dressage test. Doesn't matter. I'm not going to horse shows at all. I just want to learn at home. That's good. That's fine. I just want to trail ride. That's okay. It's not, and I shouldn't even say just, I want to trail ride. That's not just, I want to trail ride. And that's what I want to do, and I want to do it well. I want to show at small schooling shows. I want to go to practice at lower levels until I feel secure. Good for you. That's what you do, right? What is it that you want? And then you create that story. I do want to ride at much higher levels and really progress. Well, what do I have in my toolbox? Financially, time-wise, is this realistic? And then, what's the timeline? How can I get there? And then start building that story towards what you want, instead of letting these other stories that are negative slip in and keep you from moving forward. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. So get out there and start thinking of writing those stories for yourself, and getting some positive results, no matter what it is. Positive results for you. And some quote I've recently, and I can't remember, but it's the idea of you're in your chapter. You're not in someone else's chapter. So even writing the story you want, you're writing this chapter right now that you're in, not writing the chapter for someone else, or writing the chapter someone else has told you should write. You create your story and go out there and have fun with it. So have a great day, and I will talk to you soon.